Rabbi Rozenberg.
Yes, shalom.
Hi, how you doing?
I'm feeling very grateful. How are you?
I'm good, thank God. Thank God. It's great to finally speak to you. I think you do a lot of good. I appreciate you taking this time to chat.
No, listen, I think the biggest answer we have today is unity. So phone calls like this are for the betterment of everything. So I appreciate it.
Cool. All right, so tell me a lit'll bit about yourself. Where'd you grow up? What yeshiva you went to?
Okay, sure. It's a great question. I grew up in Queens, New York, and when I was around the bar mitzvah age till I was around 13. And my family had decided to become religious and switched up to Jewish yeshiva schools in Queens.
Queens where? The Chafetz Chaim, like Kew Gardens?
I was in Yeshiva Har Torah, Queens, in the Bayside area. And I wasn't really into the whole thing, even though I was learning about the alphabet, and I've had a lot of tutors, but not until I was a later teenager did I really understand the value of the inheritance. And then dropped what I was doing basically, and I went to Israel to study in yeshiva. And I did about 3 years in Jerusalem.
Where?
It was called Yeshiva Ner Yaakov. It's actually not around anymore. So I did about 3 years there, and I spent a lot going to Yeshiva Shalom Rav. Wonderful yeshiva.
Sure. River Weingarten.
Yes, definitely. And then after I did a few years in Israel, I went back to my hometown, and I went to Long Island for another 3 years. And that was Yeshiva Yoshev, out in Far Rockaway. And after a nice amount of time learning Torah in yeshiva, I decided it was time, and I started a family, and eventually we moved out to Israel.
Your phone's kind of choppy. Are you calling from Israel now?
Yeah, I'm actually calling from Israel right now. Try to speak a little clearer. Do you hear me better right now?
No, that's understandable. It was kind of cutting out a little.
Oh.
I grew up in South Beach in Miami, and I converted about 20 years ago. After I converted, I moved to Israel. I also learned in Jerusalem. I was an Aish. I was an R Sameach. And once I felt that I couldn't really do as much in Israel as I can do in the diaspora, I decided to make Yeridah. So I came back to America, and I started my, I guess we could call it ministry, of encouraging Gentiles to consider Judaism. When I was in Israel, I worked in Kiruv. I'm a carver for Jeff Seidel, and even to today, I've never stopped encouraging unaffiliated Jews to return to Torah. When I was in Israel, I had an idea if we could possibly also encourage Gentiles to consider becoming Jewish. Most people don't even know that in Jerusalem, especially in Hebrew University where I would work, every time we would have a program, many times we'd get more Gentiles than Jews interested in learning Torah. So I approached the head of the Derech program in Or Sameach, Rabbi Lazarus, and I got a letter from him basically saying there's nothing wrong to encourage Gentiles to become Jewish as long as we don't forget about targeting Jews first. So that's fine. So that's what I started doing. That's what I do now. I'm in South Florida. Most of what I do is online, and I encourage everyone, whether they have a Jewish mother or not, to return to Torah and live out the Taryag Mitzvot. How'd you get involved?
There's a lot of sanity in that.
So how'd you get involved with the black community?
It's funny. I mean, it was all kind of by accident. Basically, what happened was many years ago, I had started a brewing company, a beer company. Because my life's goal was to buy a farm, buy land in Israel. So I needed a vessel to do that, a business. And then when we were in Israel, we realized there was a few tribes, the quote-unquote lost tribes, who had returned from Ethiopia and from India, and they brought back ancient recipes. So I learned the recipes from these tribes, and we brought it to market, and it was a whole story called Lost Tribes Beverage. And because of that, we were trending on search engine optimization type of platforms, and we started getting emails from world saying they're from the Lost Tribes of Israel. And at this time, I was kind of still just leaving yeshiva and starting to go into the world, so I still had access to lots of rabbis and sources, and started doing my own investigating what's really going on with this, because of all the years I was in yeshiva, a lot of things, but they don't teach you about what to do in the future when hundreds of millions of people have an identity that's different from the ancient people of Israel. So I started reading books from scholars in Israel. I started calling the scholars. I got very interested in it. It turns out that In my family history, we have a record of having individuals search for the lost tribes for the last few hundred years, which I didn't know about, but something genetic in me that this sparked interest. And so namely, my is back to the Vilna Gaon from Vilna. And so basically what I did was I had this idea to create a platform or a social network where people from around the world could log themselves in and report basically like this, so to say, that they're from the House of Israel.
Did you just say that you're an Anical of the Vilna Gaon?
Yeah, my family traces back to the Vilna Gaon.
In terms of your work with the 10 tribes, is off of Kol Hatur, his mentioning of Mashiach ben Yosef, is that not connected?
Sure, I mean, so I think there's like a physical side to this and a spiritual side. So most of my focus is on like the actual on the ground, like what do we do about this phenomenon, like on the physical aspect. But I think that a lot we have to learn from our sages regarding this time period, and most people don't realize that Judaism, I believe, is centered around this period of time. For example, when we say Shemona Esrei, the Amidah, the silent prayer in the morning, we say, and then I'll translate it, Tzur Yisrael Kuma Be'ezrat Yisrael V'tekun Imecha Yehuda V'Yisrael. Speak about this future reunification of these two entities, one called Yehuda and one called Israel. And in the future, they unite. And if people really, took time to understand what it means, they'll better understand what's going on today. Now that you have these people who are descendants in exile called Jews who've held on to the law, and now you have this other thing around the world, like in Afghanistan and Nigeria, we have large multitudes of millions of people who are calling themselves from the house of Israel. And I think that's very relevant. So, yeah, I do study the works of our sages. We have to try to come up with innovative ways to deal with today's phenomenon without spiritual information.
How do you feel about Rabbi Akiva's opinion in Perichelik that the tribes were not coming back? He may have been a Das Yaakov in that area because he was chastised by others. Some people say that in the time of Yirmiyahu that he actually brought some back and that fulfilled, if there was anything to fulfill in Yehezkel. I've had issues with the idea, and I have a video supporting Rabbi Akiva's argument because I could see where he's coming from. That only because you may have Hebraic DNA does not mean that you are in any way intrinsically special compared to someone who doesn't have it. It's almost like a racist argument, saying that someone, apart from what they believe and how they behave, could in any way be special to the Almighty.
Right. I do think I have a very unique answer to this. I'm really glad you asked this question. I just want to make sure before I start speaking, you hear me well right now?
Every 5 seconds, it goes off for a millisecond, but it's fine. You're probably like on Golan cell phone, right?
I'm on telephone. But I think with you, it seems like you have a mind that could appreciate a Talmudic conversation. I want to give you my understanding of this argument. So basically the argument is in the Mishnah, did the tribes of Israel return or did they not return? And I think it was Rabbi Akiva who says they're not going to return in the future. And you explained because maybe they already returned. He says they're not going to return. And I believe it's Rabbi Eliezer who says that they do return. And I'd like to speak about just my approach to the lost tribes. So now that you have, let's say, the Bnei Menashe, who from India, who came back to Israel numbering in the few thousands, they actually have a large remnant still in India, and they have their own little army and militia called the Israel Army, where they think of Israel in the ground out there in India. And this phenomenon is not exclusive to India. This identity is obviously, as we're seeing, is very rampant in Nigeria and in Afghanistan and other places around the world, where people bring themselves and where they are as an extension of Israel. So what I foresee, what I want to do, is instead of doing what other organizations are doing and going to find these lost tribes and bringing them back to Israel on a return, I see hundreds of millions of people. So I want to think of a much more realistic solution, scalable. I foresee Israel stretching itself and coming to these nations and coming to these regions, literally, that some of these man-made British borders are going to dissolve in our time, and there's going to be what I would call an Israelite commonwealth that's going to back into existence. And so let's take that back to this argument, did the tribes return or not? I would say that according to the opinion Eliezer, who says the tribes do return, is it means, yes, in the future there will be hundreds of millions of people who get activated and rejoin the House of Israel. And according to the Rabbi Akiva, who says they don't come back, I believe he was referring in the context that they don't come back geographically, that they're going to stay where they are in the exile, and Israel's going to come and stretch to them. And I think that there's a lot of our sages for the last 2,000 years that would show that we're still searching for them, based on different letters that we have written from the students of the and different writings from different rabbis who refer to these tribes as the Aseret Shvatim, the 10 missing tribes. So I'm certainly sure that this has to be one of the final stages of the repair and fixing the issues of the last 1,000 years is this great global family reunion that's about to unfold.
Rabbi Eliezer was also a Tana, and it shows him there in context chastising Rabbi Akiva. It says, I think Rabbi Akiva has lost faith or something to that effect. The idea was initially in the early Midrashim that the 10 tribes were behind the river Sambatyan, this river that flowed backwards and threw stones. But then Rabbi Akiva was of the opinion that this time expired. In other words, back then, a Jew who was Mechalel Shabbat, a Jew who just dropped Judaism, was no longer Jewish in their eyes. And this is how the Rambam mentions it, this is how the Shulchan Aruch mentions it. But nowadays, I think this whole 10-tribe movement rose up again post the Zohar and post the Kabbalistic movement, and mainly post the Hasidic movement, that believes that every genetic Jew is special just because they exist and not because of how they behave and what they believe in. I see a war there. I'm someone who performs conversions in South America because they've outlawed conversions in South America, the Rabbanut has. So virtually everyone there in South America walks around trying to convince every born Jew that they're Bnei Anusim. Why? Because they know how the game is played, and they know that Jews erroneously elevate tribe over ethics. I mean, a Jew who doesn't keep Torah, granted, his Kedushin is still valid, but it calls him Kegoy. For example, you gave the Bnei Menashe. When the Bnei Menashe were found, they weren't practicing Judaism. They were practicing the local religions of the land, whether it was Islam, Buddhism, or Christianity, and then they were brought back. And this goes back also with many of the Ethiopian tribes. So these could have been opportunistic tribes that saw the way the wind was blowing and just hopped on board for social and political benefit from the state of Israel, which it has gotten, and are not necessarily who they claim to be. But even if they were, we know that with the Ethiopian Jews, they were all asked to convert for the fear of Mamzerus. I don't see how this ties into a Torah ideal. I see how it really pushes a Kabbalistic, in some way quasi-Christian ideal, that Jews are special because they exist and not because of their keeping Torah, which is why the Almighty would care to bring back someone just because he happens to have Jewish blood, instead of just saying, you know what, like the door was always open for anyone to come in, whether you were genetically Hebrew or not. I don't see how pushing that agenda actually helps the Jewish world. I think it hurts us theologically with the message that we push, whether we actually care where your parents came from ultimately. Well, I don't want you to think I'm a hater here.
No, of course, this is an important conversation. I just want to bring up that the Gemara says one of the reasons that the tribes of Israel went into exile, I believe, I can't tell you the exact location offhand, was to come back with converts, was to come back with other people.
Pesach and Pei Zion, also Rabbi Eliezer.
So I don't see a difference between, let's say, someone who may claim to be from the house of Israel vis-a-vis their return to Judaism. There's still the same they would have to do. They would have to go through a conversion process. I personally am not involved in the field of conversion, and I have nothing against it. It's just not my field. My angle is more humanitarian. Like, hey, you're telling me in Afghanistan you're from my people. Let's act like a family. Like, what does the family do? We got to make sure we don't have any middlemen corrupting, taking electricity and overcharging us. Let's go off grid together. Let's do things as a family would. Conversion is an outpour of that. That's fine by me. We can go to the right individuals who handle that. But my whole thing is, as to be an organizer and a team networker, is to create a global voice to fight what I believe is a simple way to, take away regimes that are slowing down global tikkun olam. So I'm not trying to find lost tribes necessarily and convert them. I don't think that's necessarily part of my work or what has to happen.
So, for example, there's an organization in Israel that goes around. The name of that organization is Shuva or something like that. They had a big returning, instead of converting, they call them returning, of Jews in Mallorca. And from what I heard, many of those people were just former Messianic Jews who, like virtually every Messianic Jew, claims to be one of the Bnei Anusim, just to be accepted, because they know that's the only gate that's open right now. So you have people lying or forced to lie to be accepted, because Most people know that if you go to the Rabbanut and say, I live in Guatemala and I want to convert, they won't help you. But if you tell them I live in Guatemala and I'm a Jew, then they'll send you a sitter, they'll send you supplies, and probably send you a ticket. So I think ultimately, big picture, it hurts the cause more than helps it. And this is why all these black Hebrew Israelites, the reason they're so insular is because it's really a reverse racism. They picked this up from the Jewish community because they know that Jews, not only do they just take care of themselves, they don't really want to take care of anyone into their community. In other words, they don't preach what they practice. In other words, they don't want to share that message with anyone. So these black Hebrews have come to the conclusion that, you know what, that we don't want to share it either, that redemption is for blacks and only for blacks, and the whites are going to be the slaves to the blacks. My daughter goes to a religious school here in Miami, and I remember she came home from school once, and she's telling me, oh, Daddy, was it true that when Mashiach comes, all the goyim are going to be our slaves? It's taught. It's a clear shita out there. Okay, slaves, servants, eved, it means the same thing. It ultimately hurts our cause when we're so insular and we push this insular agenda that it doesn't really matter. In my opinion, it doesn't matter. And I think according to the Torah, it doesn't matter what tribe you belong to. What matters is what you believe and how those beliefs guide your behavior, i.e., saying what Israel said in Har Sinai and Asav and Ishma, that if anyone takes upon Torah, enters the covenant, they're Jewish no matter what tribe. So I think pushing the tribal agenda actually hurts the cause more than helps it, in my opinion. But I think you're doing good work.
You're definitely right, 100% that through 613 is the way to become a Jew or Israelite, whatever you want to use the word. The only possible way is through 613. Without 613, without the mitzvot, then you don't have that. So like I said, when I do what I'm doing, I'm not really dealing with conversion or mitzvot. All these in Afghanistan, and 25 million of them, we're actually pulling data from there. So we're sending surveys, understanding what they're about, learning from them. And we're not trying to convince them to leave Islam. Maybe that's their job in life. You guys could stay Islam, but there's no reason that we should be going off grid together and creating cryptocurrencies between each other and establishing trade or something. That's what families should be doing in a time of political instability. Especially you have the Igbo in Nigeria who have this claim. We're all the common denominator between the Pashto, Igbo, and the Jews is that we're suffering from British borders that are destabilizing our region. It's an insanity not to have a conversation together in the same room with individuals as family to discuss what's going on in the world.
But you consider these individuals members of your family, even though they're Muslim or Christian?
Yeah, I have zero concern for religion at this point when it comes to trying to, save planet Earth. If they want to learn about
that's
God,
the whole status of a Jew. A Jew who doesn't keep Torah, doesn't believe in Torah, is really technically not in the covenant, which is what makes him Jewish, for lack of a better term.
I wouldn't call them Jewish. I wouldn't call these people halachic Jews. If I'm davening in the midst of 10 Jews to daven, and 8 guys and 1 Igbo and 1 Pashto in the room to make 10, I'd say we have 10 Jews in the room. But I would also say that we shouldn't put prayer as the thing that unites us. I'll give you an analogy. Let's say you have a lost cousin who disappeared or something, and you don't know what happened to them, and all of a sudden, finally, what's the first question you're going to ask them is, how many times a day do you pray, or do you have food and water and shelter and all these things that you need? So for me, I just have this inner voice in my head that says the logical thing to do is find the common denominator between large amounts of humans and you unite the good people of planet Earth. And it happens to be that, there's almost 40 million Pashtuns, almost 40 million Igbo. These are tremendous amounts of numbers of people who are making a claim. It's not like I'm going there and convincing them. They're social networks claiming. So for me, I just find it would be an insane thing not to build a network or a dialogue between us where we could unite, putting all religious topics aside. That can come after we have world peace. From all I'm concerned, that means that's my work. If someone else out there like yourself is going and converting people this way, then I'm sure you're doing a great service to someone who you're returning a soul to truth, and you're bringing sanity to the world. So I don't see.
But why do you feel an obligation? Why do you feel an obligation to people just via blood? Where is that taught?
It's not really necessarily blood. Let's say these are the descendants of Uncle who was a convert, who are claiming, that they've populated an island somewhere and they want to return. They're claiming to be part of the house of Israel through the concept that they're either 613 or they want to return to 613. So that's really the sanity or the baseline I see in it. This is not a genetic thing. This is an ideology, a family thing. And it happens to me. Our family at one point became not blood-based, but truth-based. And so that's where I see fitting potential. There's energy that needs to be harnessed. And for me, I just find logical to have the more people in one voice, the more power you have in fighting what I believe is an apparent evil in the world today.
I think non-Jews looking into this movement would only really tie it to any other ethnocentric movement out there, saying like, you know what, I'm even attempting to make a bond or a connection just because, not necessarily blood, but because his ancestor way, way back made some commitment. So in other words, we believe that he's intrinsically special versus his neighbor who's not, I'm not even going to bother to reach out to him because he's not claiming to have some link. It just seems that whittled down to its most rational common denominator there, it's really a form of, I guess, racism, for lack of a better term.
Well, what you're saying, I'd like to say is different than what I'm saying, because you were just giving examples regarding individuals. Speaking about nations of humans, large nations of people. So I see that this saying, one guy comes and says, I have a legend, this and that, or whatever it is, and puts himself above everyone else. I'm talking about geopolitical movements. I'm talking about, what happened to Nikola Tesla's electricity technology, and how come we don't have it implemented, stopping that from happening? Who's benefiting from the current system of oil? Questions that we have to fight against the world, and I'm almost certain that if you have 100 million people in the room saying the same thing, 3 million or 14 million Jews saying the same thing, the power is going to be in a large amount of people. So I could be wrong, or I could be doing something. I don't know if I'm doing something heretical in Judaism, but I find that turning this into a humanitarian of creating world peace is the natural outpouring of this many people making this exact claim.
I see what you're doing. I would consider it more, like you said, a geopolitical effort than a religious one. Then that I perfectly understand it. Sure. Okay, if it's not a religious thing, then it's not really lumped in with Judaism.
I mean, there are Kabbalistic and mystical religious implications. I could quote different rabbis over time, like Rav Tzadok Cohen, I believe. Again, I don't have it now mobile right now, but he said somewhere, I learned in his writings, that he says in the future that the Jewish people become Kohanim, become like priests, and the world becomes that status, meaning there's a shift. And there's different teachings that are...
Yeah, for sure. There's many midrashim that push this idea. Even first parak of the Tanya...
Is just strictly...
Huh?
Yeah?
The first parak of the Tanya pushes the idea that Jews are intrinsically elevated, that their soul comes from the Klipa Noga, while the soul of the non-Jew is intrinsically impure, and this is why, even if someone converts, they're just a gilgul of a Jew. I'm not big in quoting Kabbalistic sources because they're ultimately, typically, nowadays considered unethical if applied to any other group. But yes.
I have a strong question for you, if that's okay.
Sure.
So let's say we're talking about the status of these Kabbalistic texts, and if it's okay to discuss them, bring them up in terms of regular conversations. So let's have halachic codifiers, people who've written the laws of halacha, like Rabbi Yosef Karo, the Gaon, other individuals. Now, we hold their halachas to high standards, from the Gaonim, whatever period you want to look at, we held these halachas to very high standards, and we implemented them, we adopted them. But some of these codifiers who were in these halachot were also speaking about that they had Gilui Eliyahu, that they had the revelations of him with angels. So where do we draw the line to say, we're going to take your codified laws, but we're not going to believe you that you're actually learning with angels? So where do we actually separate this phenomenon? And maybe you'll say this concept of Gilui Eliyahu later on and after the Gaonic period in back plus years ago. But I have this question. It's not educated enough, but I wonder, where do we draw the line that will take the halacha of the Vilna Gaon, but we're serious?
Where do we draw the line between personal opinion and actual halacha? Now, you mentioned the Gra, and you mentioned...
Or the personal opinion of the person whose halacha was following.
Right, for sure. You mentioned the Vilna Gaon and you mentioned Rav Yosef Karo. They're not codifiers of halacha, they're compilers of halacha. Codifiers of halacha is pretty much what the Shulchan Aruch used, which is the Rambam, the Rosh, and the Rif. Now, a codifier is someone who took all the halachot in the Talmud and...
I understand the nuance you're speaking about.
Okay, fine. If something comes directly from Chazal, it's considered binding and obligatory. We have the mitzvah of lo tasur, of not straying from the right or to the left from what the sages institute. So that has to do with halacha lema'aseh, actual law. How do you keep Shabbat? How do you keep Yom Kippur? Everything outside of that falls under the realm of Midrash and Agadah. We said many times, oh, don't worry, that's a Medrash. In other words, you could accept it or you could drop it. It could be beautiful, it could be silly. There's even a saying, I think is the Baal Shem Tov says, if anyone takes all Midrashim seriously, he's a fool, and if he rejects them all, he's an idiot.
Right.
So, okay, fine. So that is the defining line.
Do you think the Baal Shem Tov was referring to that concept when he said he was learning with angels? Was he being allegoric?
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Allegorical to us. It may have happened to him.
In other words,
when the Ramchal, the Magon, the Baal Shem Tov, the Arizal, when all these scholars, they say they were learning angels in Elijah the prophet, you're saying that's not literal. They're saying something else.
It may have been literal to their experience, but you're not obligated to believe it. In other words, also Rabbi Asher has a whole sefer that he says that an angel dictated every word to him.
Called Magid Misharim.
You don't have to believe it. It's not binding.
I'm not even remotely suggesting that this is something you have to believe, but I just find it interesting that you have Jewish people today who take, the halakha, like you said, the Beit Yosef or the Vilna Gaon, you take them very seriously, but they're not going to take serious when he was speaking that he had Elijah the prophet. And I'm not implying that they have to, if you're 100% right. That's not part of our religion, is believing in those things. They're part of our religion, in the commandments. So I just find it interesting. That's why I throw it out.
Oh, that's cool.
Speaking about that, it's a fair question, though. Where do we draw the line?
No, absolutely. I belong to a different camp in the Jewish world. In my group, we consider ourselves halachic purists. So we always try to make a big distinction between Agadah and Halakha. Just like Chazal. I mean, Chazal constantly say...
with that.
All right. Well, Chazal also always make a distinction between what's the Rabbanan and what's the Raita. We always have to make a distinction lest we fall into the Asur of being Baal Tosif, of adding to the Torah. So that's the distinction. Now, post the 13th century, Judaism went mainstream mystical. And this is why you're quoting Rav Yosef Karo, the Arizal, the Ramchal. It's really a different world.
These are also individuals who trace rabbi to rabbi to rabbi back to Moses, in a generation of who is their teacher back to the time of Rabbi Akiva or the time of which obviously we could trace back to the Anshe Knesset Agdol. You're a billion% right there. What I'm suggesting has nothing to do with how to actually be a good practicing Jew. But I just try to throw out creative ideas. So
no, for sure. I mean, it's clearly a shita
for the people of Israel.
What you're saying is not heretical. It's clearly accepted in the Jewish community. I'm just sort of tossing in these ideas like for the sake of thoughts. I take a different approach.
It's fair game, yeah.
The reason I take a different approach is because I'm in the business of trying to package our religion and hand it over to other people. So this puts me in the front line of many questions that the average rabbi wouldn't get. And I really have to explain and dissect what we believe step by step in some sort of systematic fashion. So I don't have the luxury to say, like many Kabbalistic rabbis do, that all of the Torah Shebaal Peh was given in Har Sinai. I have to make a distinction between Halach LeMoshe Sinai, things that were developed by the 13 principles of exegesis, breaking things down. But I believe in Torah Shebaal Peh, right? But in today's...
I think you're doing a great job laying the foundation for someone, and it's that human who takes your and later on in life wants to learn these texts, he's allowed to. But otherwise, you've done your part of inspiring someone to be a Jew, and I think that's wonderful.
I do support what you do in Africa because there are many people, especially that how many Noahide groups exist in Africa today, and I don't typically praise these Noahide groups, but these are signs that these people want to become Israel. Right? The only reason they're Noahide is because no one helps them out to convert. But just by individuals like you helping these tribes return to Torah, there's always an Erev Rav, for lack of a better word, pre-Kabbalistic, in other words, not an evil Erev Rav, but a mixed multitude of people who also come out of Mitzrayim in that sense. So it's definitely causing good things to happen. Just ultimately, big picture, it's hard for me to try to justify us feeling some sort of obligation to someone just because of heritage, apart from belief and behavior.
I see it as the opposite. I see it as the opposite. I don't see it as an obligation to them. I see it as they're the asset. We can leverage them towards wealth. I don't see it as like they have this claim, so we have to come in. And when you say, my vision in Africa, I don't think most humans alive today really don't have a clue what I'm actually talking about when I speak about the great decentralization, when to dissolve, and we evolve onto cryptocurrencies, and we're making our electricity. Most people just aren't in that parsha to really comprehend what I'm discussing, and how quickly we're going to evolve out of religious talks into a much more evolved humanity of principles and morals. But it's for the eye to see, and which is why I'm very quiet in the public eye unless I'm asked to say something or speak. I'm not making posts every day, showing Africa, doing things. I'm very under the network, and today, when people do look up and see the results of my work, they'll see hopefully a global institution that's functioning on very high level ethical and moral principles and sustainable means that we're going to the world a little bit.
Mm-hmm. Where do you live in Israel now?
I have land in the north in the Galilee farm.
Awesome.
And I go between there and Jerusalem.
Wow, that's a little bit of a schlep. I mean, you're right by the Kinneret, or north of there?
I'm a little bit south of the Kinneret, about a half hour south, and
so like Beit Shan.
It's in the Beit Shan Valley. Actually, there's a Gemara where the Garden of Eden was located. According to the opinion that it was in Israel, Platish says it's in the Beit Shan Valley, and we're in the exact location where King David was standing. They say when he cursed the land after King Saul fell on his sword. In the verse, he uses the word sedate remote, the field of offerings, which is exactly where we are at the foot of the Gilboa, where King Saul and stuff. So we're in a very auspicious piece of land.
Yeah, I spent some time in Kibbutz Eliyahu, which is in that area.
Oh, sure, that's our neighbor.
Yeah, and I think Kibbutz Yavne is also near there.
With that one, but yes, Eliyahu was our neighbor. There's been bio-bees.
Right, bio-bee, yeah.
Natural, there's all these pesticides in the world today really doing a lot of damage to the people. So they're making alternative solutions. So instead of buying, certain it's going to kill the bugs, but also kill us, they're making, a natural spider, a natural bird that they'll sell you, and that spider or bird will take care of the issue for you. Interesting stuff.
So, hashkafically, who do you align with the most in all the movements, especially in Israel?
No, you know what? I see that every single exile group came back with some great information, so I was ready to pick and choose from everyone without having a self-identity. I foresee major changes in Israel of spiritual. I'm not settling for anyone. I don't align with any political party. I don't want to align myself with a rabbi alive today, even though I have many rabbis alive today that are my rabbis, but I identify with what type of Jew they are. So I'll have a rabbi who's Taimani, a rabbi who's Hasidic, a rabbi who's Lithuanian, all these inspections, and I learn from them and I call for the right questions. As far as the last influences in my life, I'm sure if you can't tell by the phone call right now, time of the Ramchal, Rabbi Moshe Chaim Luzzatto, the Vilna Gaon, the Ariya Kodesh. These are influences in my life. Rabbi Nachman of Breslov. These are, the Balatanya. These are sages who I feel contributed a lot of needed sanity and spirituality that humanity needs to flourish. But at the same time, you are 1,000% correct. That is not the exclusive way to be a Jewish or the only way to be Jewish. That is an option that I'm choosing to follow.
Yeah, it's definitely a way. I mean, I'm not shooting it down, and I don't really shoot down Kabbalah. I just tell people that, it's not for everybody. And many rabbis will tell you not to.
I do believe that the core goes back to the Gaonic period of the time where we had exilarchs with David to the nations, and we had actual, houses of Torah law where it was just about the law. That's really where I lie. Whatever. That's one thing. Whatever your hashkafa is, your viewpoint's another thing. And I'm sure there's a fine line between them.
Mm-hmm. Cool, man. All right, consider me your brother. If there's anything you need, just let me know. If you could plug in your website or somewhere people can go and read more about your work.
Thanks, I appreciate it. I mean, I do have a few things on YouTube speaking about the lost tribes of Israel. My magnum opus, my main theory of how this all works is a lecture on YouTube called The Lost Tribes of Israel and the Purpose of Reality, where I go from Adam until the great future ahead of the who, what, when, where, why things happen, all in about 45 minutes. I do have some other lectures more controversial on YouTube where I speak about certain plants and parts of the mind and and psychoactive chemicals, where I threw out some theories of it. So if anyone's interested in that, that's out there as well. And my main mission is I'm trying to do a census, trying to do a head count of who around the world identifies or believes that they're from the House of Israel. I think it's going to be easily over 100 million people. Our website's in its beta phase, so it's not really live now for what it's going to be doing, but for the time being, people could still sign up and register for themselves, and it's iTribe, itribe.us, itribe.us. And like you said, it's not a thing, so if someone's looking to convert, they should definitely be speaking to you and not me. But it's a vegetarian thing, and that's really what it comes down to.
I mean, I think the main platform where we can unite on in the Gemara brings out this notion that we shouldn't tie any ancestral heritage to a people nowadays. Mind you, this was in the times of Amoraim when this statement was made. Why? Because Sanherib mixed up all the nationalities of all the nations, and possibly everyone walking around today has some sort of Jewish heritage, and we don't know. So my approach is that we should treat everyone like they're your brother. Like it says in Perkei de Rabbi Asher, it says, who's the hero of heroes? He who turned an enemy into a friend. And I think that's what you're doing. You're bringing people who are far, you're bringing them close. I just extend my reach a little further. I bring them all in, whether they claim to be Israel or not. Yeah.
Hey, that's, it's great, and I definitely would not be surprised. I definitely hope and pray that every single human alive today has some piece somehow in them from the genetic mix-up. That wouldn't be surprising to me, but whatever it is, I'm optimistic that anything that the prophet has spoken about regarding the future happening in our generation. Call me an optimist, call me a dreamer, but I believe that, self-fulfilling prophecy, that since we believe it so much, we make it happen, but we should be worthy, and I appreciate you extending your brotherhood to me. I think that the greatest thing is unity, as I mentioned, and I hope that this happens in America, because in America it doesn't look like it's in such a safe place right now, and I think that this whole Israelite awakening, or this Jewish awakening, or however you want to put it, can really help steer the country in the right direction. So, see what happens.
All right, sounds good, bro. All right, be well.